You might remember a video on this channel from back in September called Cardano and the Layerverse. That video was about the idea that the Cardano base layer, the L1, the mainnet, would always represent the Cardano root of trust, while an arbitrary number of additional layers representing arbitrary programming paradigms and trade-offs between scaling, decentralization, and security could and would be built on top of that base layer. Today, the advent of EVM compatibility in Cardano also brought us the birth of that layerverse. But this will just be the first of many, many hungry layers that will happily gobble up the assets of other chains. Ready? Let's go. Today, we will discuss the birth of the Cardano Layerverse with the launch of the Milkomeda sidechain, some details on the utility of the Liqwid NFTs, and the keynote from Charles at the Dubai Binance Blockchain Week event. If these videos are bringing you value each weekday, I would love it if you would consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Today was not a small day. Today was the day that we got EVM compatibility in Cardano. In the island, the pond, and the ocean paradigm, this is not the ocean, but this was a big day for the pond. If you're new around here, you're probably asking, okay, but what does this actually mean? So the profile header, the Twitter profile header of Milkomeda actually tells you exactly what this is. Milkomeda is a side chain of Cardano. It's not on the Cardano mainnet. It's also not on the Ethereum mainnet. It's a side chain to the Cardano mainnet that's EVM compatible. That means it runs the Ethereum virtual machine, which means you could take Ethereum dApps and launch them on this side chain. dApps written in Solidity could be launched on this side chain. The beautiful part is that Cardano users can wrap their Cardano assets, send them over to this side chain, and then interact with those Ethereum dApps. So you could use wrapped ADA and interact with Ethereum dApps on this side chain and then pay the fees in ADA. This is important because I think we can all agree at this point in the development of smart contract blockchains that the one thing we don't want to do is pay Ethereum fees. Given my dim views of the prospects for security in the EVM and Solidity world, you can imagine that I'm not too psyched for Cardano users to go over to a sidechain to use Solidity-based projects. But I am excited if this were to result in Ethereum users coming over and using a Cardano sidechain because the fees don't make the network unusable. In any case, Milkomeda has given us this nice Medium article, which has a nice rundown of how to use Flint Wallet to get Cardano assets over to the sidechain, and also how to use MetaMask to interact with the sidechain. Apparently, Flint Wallet integration with the Milkomeda sidechain is coming soon. They say the Milkomeda Foundation has been in discussions with DC Spark, that's the developer of the Flint Wallet, to push for adding native Milkomeda C1 support inside of Flint Wallet. This exciting feature is slated to release in the upcoming months. And in the meantime, people are going to be using MetaMask to deal directly with dApps on Milkomeda. But more importantly, this article also gives us a rundown of the dApps that are actually available at launch on Milkomeda. And they include the Milky Swap DEX, the Occam X AMM DEX, Nomad, which is an interoperability tool, Multichain, another interoperability tool, Seller, another interoperability protocol, and the Muesli Swap AMM DEX on Milkomeda. If we go to the actual Milkomeda version of the Muesli Swap DEX, you'll notice a pretty familiar AMM type interface if you're used to using automated market makers on Cardano or elsewhere. This one may be a little bit Spartan, but I would actually prefer, my minimalist tendencies would actually probably prefer this over a much busier UI. And it's got the three buttons you expect: trade, add liquidity, and farm. If you remember the video from the other night, there was also a stake button in the testnet version. And we'll explain in a second why that's currently missing. But the swap or exchange part of the platform is about what you'd expect. You pick a currency, pick an opposing currency, another currency in the trading pair, and then you go ahead and swap on through. Add liquidity, again, works exactly like you think. You pick one currency and then the other, add an amount, and then the other currency in the trading pair, and it'll tell you how much you need to add to be an LP in that liquidity pool. What's interesting here is really the types of assets that are available. You'll immediately notice as you go through this list that you've got some wrapped assets that we haven't seen much of in the Cardano ecosystem so far. But most importantly, maybe you've got stable coins. We've got USDC and USDT right here. We've also got DAI up here. We've got BUSD. What's interesting about this is that if you're planning on being a liquidity provider, obviously your big fear is impermanent loss. And this is something that can result when the price of the two assets in the trading pair diverge. And when you've got two assets that are stable coins, the prospects of those two diverging in price, at least the extent to which they might diverge in price, presents a very different picture of the risk of impermanent loss than if you had two non-stable assets. This is a pretty big advantage for Milkomeda in that we don't yet have stable coins in the Cardano ecosystem. Not really. Very, very soon we'll have things like JED and a host of other stable coins, but we don't have them yet. So you can't yet do this LPing into a stablecoin pair, which has brings a very different prospect for impermanent loss. One thing that you will notice is actually missing from this list is the Milk token. We know from some of MusliSwap's posts that the Milk token will remain the governance token for both the Milkomeda AMM version of the MusliSwap DEX as well as the Cardano mainnet version of MusliSwap DEX. But there's no Milk token in this list, apparently because wrapped milk for the Milkomeda sidechain is not yet available. You'll also probably remember that the stake page from the testnet version of the MusliSwap Milkomeda DEX looks like this. It looks like the two stake pools that were available, at least in the testnet version, were earning space by staking space and earning space by staking milk. It sounds like because wrapped milk couldn't be a thing yet, that they decided on holding off on this whole stake page. But given the pace that MusliSwap has worked in the past, I would expect this to become a thing pretty quickly, because one thing about the MusliSwap team is they are quick. They work very quickly. I think the launch of Milkomeda, though, is really about more than EVM compatibility. It's about more than Ethereum dApps being usable by Cardano users. It's really about the birth of the Layerverse. We know that the Cardano mainnet, it's going to be the root of trust for everything in the Cardano ecosystem. And then on top of that root of trust, which is kind of the optimal solution to the blockchain trilemma, how do we best have a decentralized network that's also scalable and has very high security? This is the main thrust of the Gen 3 blockchain race. Who can actually solve this puzzle? I think Cardano is the project that has best solved that puzzle, and that's embodied in the base layer. But on top of that base layer, we can make different decisions. Instead of having Plutus as the programming language, in the case of Milkomeda, we can have something like Solidity be the programming language. On another sidechain in the future, it might be, any other programming language, functional, imperative, object-oriented, whatever you want. We could create a sidechain where the smart contract programming language is any arbitrary programming language you want. We can also decide to make different trade-offs in the blockchain trilemma. We could have a sidechain or any kind of layer, layer beyond the base layer that doesn't have the decentralization leg. It's not decentralized. Maybe it's extremely scalable, but also has very high security. maybe we have some use case where we don't care about speed at all, and it is decentralized, and we also have very high security. We can make different trade-offs with different layers on top of the base layer, however we want. Any arbitrary trade-off could be made, and we can create a sidechain for that if there's a use case that caters to. But the great thing is, given the arbitrary nature of the Layerverse, we could recreate whatever trade-offs, whatever programming language, whatever characteristics any other blockchain, may embody. We could have a sidechain for that. And those sidechains, if the Cardano base layer they sit upon is the best root of trust out of all the Gen 3 blockchains, they might end up eating the entire Gen 3 blockchain world. And even beyond that, if we count things like Bitcoin, which have no real operative intention of ever having smart contracts, so they're not really, that blockchain is not really in the Gen 3 race, these sidechains could eat almost everything if Cardano has done the best at creating that root of trust in the base layer. And when we look at the total value locked in the Cardano blockchain, we see this crazy number already. We're almost at $500 million. But if you look down here, you notice none of those Milkomeda dexes are really on the chart yet. We don't have a Milky swap. We don't have an Occam X. We don't have the Milkomeda version of MuesliSwap. I mean, look, there's only 17 million locked in MuesliSwap according to this chart, and that is, I believe, just the amount in the mainnet DEX. So what is this number going to look like after Cardano's been EVM compatible for a year, 2 years? How many projects are going to migrate over from Ethereum as the consensus becomes more and more that the chain is unusable due to fees, and that the merge to ETH 2 and ETH 2.0 eventually maybe won't solve that? If this Layerverse thesis plays out, it's going to be very hard for other blockchains to compete with Cardano, because anything they bring to the table that's of value, we can just incorporate as a sidechain. Today, we also heard from Liqwid about the AquaFarmer NFTs, how they'll be minted, and what utility they'll actually bring to the protocol. You'll remember that these are these very adorable little robot farmers. This one's got a rake, which is kind of interesting. He appears to be a pretty advanced robot, yet he still has use for the rake. I like his kind of combination of old and new here. He's open to using the rake, even though he might be a high-tech robot. I like that. So we found out that it sounds like everyone who has one or more LQ will automatically qualify for the drop. Each qualifying address will be limited to a maximum of 3 Liqwid AquaFarmer NFTs. They say we will be using drip drops to take a snapshot of the LQ token holders on Monday, April 11th at 1600 UTC. The exact mint date will be announced shortly after the snapshot is complete. So we don't know exactly when the mint is going to take place, but it'll be announced at some point after that snapshot. So here's how these NFTs will actually work. And I love the fact that they could have easily just created some commemorative NFTs, and the Liqwid community is so strong, they would have lapped it up. They would have bought all the NFTs, and it would have been money in the pocket of Liqwid. But that's not the way Liqwid rolls. They tend to do the right thing. Anytime I see Liqwid doing something, they tend to do the right thing in all cases. We saw this with their Discord airdrop to their Discord users. As far as I know, those are still the only LQ tokens that are in circulation. So they say Liqwid DAO's implementation of the V2 Agora governance module will include functionality to stake AquaFarmer's NFTs in the safety pool alongside LQ for increased yields. So depending on the AquaFarmer NFT rarity, holders would access increased staking rewards anywhere between 2 to 5%. So if you have one of these NFTs alongside your LQ that you are staking in the Agora safety pool, then you're going to get a boost to your staking rewards, and it'll be somewhere between 2 and 5%, depending on the rarity of the NFT. Some additional details here. It looks like the mint price for these Liqwid AquaFarmer NFTs will be 44 ADA, and secondary transactions in these NFTs will incur a 5% trading royalty, and 100% of these royalties will go to the Liqwid DAO treasury. I love the fact that these are what in the early days of this channel, you remember I used to call functional NFTs. And what I meant by that was NFTs that actually serve some functional utility. These certainly do. They also kind of, take on the aesthetics of a lot of the kinds of PFP NFTs we've seen in the past, but they actually serve a function in the protocol. I think we're going to see a lot of NFT kind of utility like this in the future. Full disclosure, do not forget, I own both MuesliSwap Milk tokens and Liqwid LQ tokens. Finally, Charles is in Dubai at Binance Blockchain Week, and he gave a 15-minute keynote address. This led to a predictable narrative playing out once again. He got a really enthusiastic introduction from the hosts, and the crowd was pretty lukewarm. There were some people clapping, but there were a lot of people just sitting there in silence. Why? Because they've been subject to the psyops for years that have led them to believe that the consensus is that somehow Cardano is bad, Charles Hoskinson is bad. Why? They're not really sure, but it's confusing why. But somehow the thrust of the psyops has always been Charles bad, Cardano bad. Then they listened to his 15-minute keynote address. In this keynote address, he focused on the need for decentralization. He talked about the Moxie Marlin Spike article recently about how Web 3.0 was a chance to reverse what's happened on the internet. In the early days of the internet, everything was pretty decentralized. And then a handful of centralized players, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples of the world came in and centralized a lot of what used to be decentralized. While blockchain technology and Web 3.0 might be a chance for us to re-decentralize the internet, but only if we keep blockchains decentralized. And Charles cited some things like the centralized role certain players are playing right now in the blockchain space, like OpenSea with NFTs, and even JP Morgan with their acquisition of some critical infrastructure for Ethereum, like MetaMask and Infura. We can't really go that direction. If we want blockchains and Web 3.0 to represent anything different than what we've had in the past, we need that decentralization. This appeared to be very persuasive to the audience. We saw the same thing even just a month ago with some of the general crypto Twitter spaces Charles jumped into. At the beginning, people were uncertain. They're like, wait a second, this guy's supposed to be bad somehow. But by the end of his presentation or his discussion with them, they were like, okay, maybe we were lied to about Cardano. Maybe all that wasn't true. Maybe this was all just a big psyop by competitors. Once again, we saw that with this Dubai keynote address. By the end of it, they seem to love him. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.